Hey guys, my name is Eric Escobar. That was a great introduction. So first of all, I want to apologize. I'm coming down with a cold, so if I sound nasally or if I hack and I cough, I apologize. You're just going to get that. If you talk to me afterwards, I'm not going to shake your hand because I don't want to spread the plague. Anyways, today I'm going to be talking to you about rogue cell towers, how to detect them, and why it's kind of important. I definitely stole this image online, but it's one of these hidden cell towers that you can see in this form. It's in a cactus. Let's see. All right, so a little bit about me. So I have a degree in civil engineering and then a master's degree in civil engineering. A lot of people ask me, wait, you do cybersecurity. How does that fit in at all? And a little bit about engineering and some of the sciences is really they're all about asking questions and figuring out how to do things on the questions that you asked or why something happens. And honestly, cybersecurity wasn't that far of a leap. I've always loved computers. I've always loved trying to figure out things, figure out problems. And it was kind of the natural step after I talked to a few people and I was like, well, I could do that. Like I can Google things and figure things out. Like that's pretty much what I do in my day job anyways. And so somebody gave me an opportunity and they said, you know what, just try out the cybersecurity thing for a little bit. If you don't like it, you can always fall back on a professional engineering degree and go from there. And so I've always loved things wireless. When I was in college, even with a civil engineering degree, I got my ham radio license just so I could play around. I love to automate things and I love the Raspberry Pi platform. I have chickens, and so my chicken coop is automated, keeps out predators, opens and closes. My sprinklers are run on a cron job from a Raspberry Pi that sits in my garage. So I really like to nerd out on things like that, and it's just a hobby of mine. And I thought, hey, what better of a way to do this than use the Raspberry Pi to detect rogue cell towers? So I originally caught the hacking bug when I realized, hey, I could do stuff with wireless. I love ham radio already. And I went to DEF CON just to kind of see what it was about when I initially started in cybersecurity. And then I thought, oh, like there's a capture the flag game, I can play this. And so I got a couple teammates together and we've rocked it 3 years in a row. And actually I'm banned from playing anymore. So it's still really fun. So if you guys ever go out to DEF CON, I highly recommend at least just checking it out, to say the least. Okay, so a bit about what I do. So again, I started out civil engineering, and then I went and I worked for Barracuda Network. So I worked with a lot of University of Michigan graduates because there's an office right here, and I worked in on the West Coast office. I'm from California. So now what I do though is I work for SecureWorks, and I'm a pen tester. So what I do is I basically go into large companies. We go Fortune 100, Fortune 50, Fortune 500. You name the size of the company, we've gone in there. And we break in there because they try to test their security. So they say, come, do your worst. We have, red team. A red team will actually physically go try and break in. I'm a pen tester, so I do like network, wireless kind of pen testing. And pretty much I break into companies to make them more secure. So I break in, tell them how I did it, give them a report, we talk, go back and forth, and then they make everything more secure. So overall, it's a really great job. I can't believe it's a real job because I get to do all the terrible bad things that you read about. I'd say half the time you look at a breach that was online and you're like, yeah, I could have done that if this company, if I were bad, right? So I get to do it, and I get to do it in the name of keeping things safe, keeping things more secure. So it's honestly the best job, and it affords me opportunities like this to come and talk to you guys. Okay, so excuse me. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover what is a rogue cell tower, why you should care about a rogue cell tower. And then when you care about them, then, okay, well, how can you detect them? And after you've detected them, then how can you find them? And then how you can build one of these, for less than $50 at home. And now you've detected a tower, like what do you do after you've detected an anomaly? How do you go figure out what it is and where it is? Okay, so first, a rogue cell tower. These can come in many different forms. Lately on the market, there's things called software-defined radios, and they have fast enough processors now, fast enough chips, and accurate enough clocks to where they can simulate a cell tower. And basically, if you think about the way kind of cell towers work, it was designed so that if you're driving down the highway, you can be on a phone call and you'll go from cell tower to cell tower to cell tower, and you never have to worry about connecting or reauthorizing and figuring out like, okay, what tower do I want to connect to, and kind of to figure that out. Unlike Wi-Fi, for example, where if you go over to your friend's house, you have to go connect with their password, and you go to somebody else's house, you go to work, school, you have to connect to all these different networks, and you're responsible for trying to figure out that connection. Cell phones just work. And that's great, and it's also kind of bad, and we'll kind of talk about why it's kind of bad. But pretty much these devices, you can create them, hackers can create them, Governments can purchase them, governments can create them, and pretty much what they do is they simulate a cell tower. And so you think all the information that goes over a cell tower, that is subject to being intercepted. And so pretty much what they're called is IMSI catchers. And we'll go over what an IMSI and what that means. But there's a lot of different names for them. You probably heard them as interceptors, cell site simulators, stingrays, and there's a ton of different names for them. There's not really any one thing that you can call them. And they have the ability to collect information about you indirectly through metadata. And so that's stuff like call length, who you called, dial numbers. And in some cases, you can see messages and the calls and the actual data. And just to kind of talk about the metadata and what that means and how that kind of works is you hear that line a lot, like, well, we don't collect content, we don't collect data, we just collect metadata. And one of the scary things about that is metadata often tells you all that you really need to know. If I know who you're calling, when you're calling, where you're calling them from, I probably didn't need to know what you actually talked to them about, because having that context is generally enough. And so that's one of the things is that when you hear like, oh, well, it's just metadata collection. If you were to look at, say a picture that you took on your iPhone and you didn't know what that image was of, if it had, the GPS coordinates of where the picture was taken, the aperture, you can know if it was a dark or light environment, you can know where it was taken, the altitude that it was taken at, the angle that they were facing when they took the picture. You can know the date, the time, and pretty much everything else. That's all the context of what the picture looks like, and that's the metadata about it. And so you do really need to see the picture in order to get an idea of what's going on. And really, I think the reason why mostly metadata is collected is because how do you store all actual data? I think it's more of a limitation of how you store it, but I digress. So how are cell site simulators used today? Well, in the United States, IMSI catchers are used by law enforcement agencies, and they help to locate, track, and collect data on suspects. The ACLU has identified 66 agencies in 24 states that own stingrays. And stingrays, that's the manufacturer of one of these devices, and that's kind of how they got their name. Stingrays is the manufacturer of them. And this is just what we know about. And I'm sure there's a lot more, and this data is probably old by the time it came out. And we know that it's actually been used, at least in Chicago, for political protests. IMSI catcher, they have IMSI catchers that you can roll up in a van. They're portable now, and they're getting smaller and smaller as technology gets smaller and smaller. And so some of the past work, if you want to go read up on this, there was somebody named Freddie Martinez. He did a really great, counter surveillance with IMSI catchers talk. And then DEFCON 18, somebody actually showed how you create your own IMSI catcher, that can detect your cell phone, that can detect other things. I would stay away from trying to do one yourself because the legality on that is super gray. But it's still a really interesting talk nonetheless. And actually at the end of his talk, they made him take out his SD card where he wrote all the information to and physically cut it and destroy it on stage to prove that, hey, all the information that, all the information that he collected during the talk was actually destroyed after it. And it's a really interesting talk because you can actually see him, cut it up. Okay, so, and then if you want to read more about it, the EFF, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the EFF, but they have a ton of information about it, and I really recommend going to their site because they keep everything up to date, up to the minute, and it's just a really interesting read and how it affects your rights kind of as a citizen, right? And then another really interesting read is ACLU's stingray tracking devices and who's got them. You'd be really surprised some of the agencies that have stingray tracking devices that are not necessarily the agencies that you would think would have them. EPA, why does, I don't know. Okay, so then how are they used abroad? Well, I mean, there's no reason that just the United States is gonna have them. These are sold all around the world. There's reported cases of them being used in Ireland, the UK, China, Germany, Norway, South Africa, and these are just ones of reported cases of what we know about. I'm sure they're used in every major nation today. There's no reason that a government wouldn't buy them. But more so, one of the things that I think is interesting, and I'm sure is gonna start happening more and more, is that it's gonna start going corporate. So corporations will start buying them to do, corporate espionage. And we've seen a little bit of this from Chinese spammers who are caught sending spam phishing messages. So, if you guys have ever gone to like a hacker conference like DEF CON, or something along those lines, you'll notice that sometimes you'll receive text messages, and these text messages may look like they're coming from your mom, but it's definitely not a text message that you would expect your mom to send you. And that's kind of how these things work is if they're impersonating the cell tower, they can impersonate information that goes to your device and what your device receives and sends, kind of back and forth. They're acting as the man in the middle, essentially. And so they're used by governments and corporations alike. And I think we're really going to see a lot more corporations using them when they realize the power that there is intercepting somebody's cell phone signal. Especially because if you think about it, your cell phone, you take it everywhere. You never turn it on airplane mode. You always want to be able to receive text messages. You always want to be able to check, all the social media, keep up on the news, check your email, all that stuff. And nobody really ever turns it off, especially now that there's, unlimited data and all these things. That's people's main gateway. Now, if you can control or at least see information as it goes over, over the air, what better way to get information on somebody than, try and look at it from there. Okay, so let's talk about IMSI. IMSI catcher, that's always a weird phrase. Whenever I say it, at a party or talking to somebody, they're like, what? I don't understand what an IMSI is. And it stands for International Mobile Subscriber Identity. And it's a means of basically identifying your device on the network. So you can kind of think of it like, this is a bad analogy, but like a MAC address for a computer on the network, right? It's a unique identifier, a way to uniquely identify it from any other cell phone that's on the network. And it's made up of a couple different things, but it's typically around 15 digits long, and we'll go over how it's generally built out. But it's made of three things: the MCC, or Mobile Country Code, the Mobile Network Code, or MNC, and the Mobile Subscription Identification Number, or the MSIN. And so pretty much the MSIN is really the only unique one out of all three of those. And so if you just are curious, you can go look on Wikipedia and see all the country codes that are associated with your device, and you can also see all of the all the network codes, MNC on it. And it's kind of interesting just to scroll through and see like, oh, this code, it's kind of like an area code, right? You look at it and it's like, okay, this is a designation for a country. This is a designation for where that network actually is. And it's kind of interesting to go poke through, especially when you start collecting some data. And yeah, IMSI, I've already covered that. It's a unique identifier for your device. Just think of it that you have an IMSI and nobody else has that exact same IMSI, at least in this country, right? It's a way to uniquely identify you. And really, if you can be uniquely identified by that, it's easy to track you. And so this is kind of how your IMSI is built out. So the first three is your MCC, and for the United States, it's always going to be 310. So you'll see 310, that'll be the very beginning of it. And it's just those three digits. You can look up other country codes. There's one for every country. And then your carrier, that'll have a separate MNC. So you look 026, that just happens to be AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, all these other different ones, they'll have all their own separate MNC. So it's created by the MCC, the MNC, and then the MSIN, that's your unique number. That's really the unique part of it. So if you have AT&T in your United States, you're gonna have the first six are all gonna be the same. Anything after that, that's going to be what number actually uniquely identifies it. All right, so why should you care? Because you figure law enforcement, they're trying to keep the public safe. They're trying to keep people safe. And so if they're trying to collect information on the bad guys, who cares? They're doing their job. They're trying to get information. They're trying to intercept and see, hey, what's out there? They're just trying to collect information on suspects. They're trying to collect information on the bad guys. So why do we care? Well, the thing is that your phone, it connects to the strongest cell tower that's there. And so if somebody pulls up in a van, if somebody has a portable IMSI catcher, your phone is automatically going to connect to the cell tower that has the strongest signal. And so you're just going to get caught in one big net. So while you may not be the target of an investigation, but if you're in a public space that maybe there's a drug dealer or some other nefarious person there, all of a sudden what's going to happen is you're going to get caught in the same net that drug dealer is. And you can bet that they're not just going to look at a slice of information. You can bet that eventually what's going to happen is that they're just going to aggregate all that data, and who knows where that gets stored? Who knows how that happens? And maybe the warrant was to look at the nefarious person, but your information also got cut up in it. So it'd be like somebody performing a search warrant on your apartment by you, and your apartment also gets ransacked just because you were in proximity. And so that's one of the reasons that you should kind of worry about it. And the other thing that you should also look for is if you look on your phone, you'll have LTE, 4G, and if you ever see your phone automatically go to 2G and then back up, typically that's you've connected to a rogue cell tower, and it's downgraded you to 2G because 2G has some protocol weaknesses that allow you to get more information, and then you'll go right back. You'll never know. Your phone does a really good job of automatically connecting you to these things. And so you don't know if all of a sudden you've been walking by and you had your phone in your pocket and you came up next to a rogue tower, because your phone's not going to tell you, oh, rogue cell tower detected, because it's not something that it was designed to detect in the first place. And so, one person, like I was saying, one person can be targeted, but everyone else is just caught in the net. And I really hate the phrase that's like, oh, well, you're fine, just trust us. We're keeping your data safe, right? And so you could be indirectly targeted just by being in proximity to somebody else. And so that's one of the reasons that I support, the law enforcement doing the job, trying to find the bad guy, but at the same time, I don't want to get lumped in just because I'm in the proximity of somebody else that, that may be under investigation. Okay, so we talked about really why you should care. And really, honestly, what it all comes down to is that your privacy is at risk. That's really all that it is. I mean, there's corporate secrets, your digital life is out there. Your phones are generally everybody's gateway to everything. It's how you talk to people. That's how you communicate with people. That's how you have social media. You look up medical conditions. You look up all this really personal, private stuff. And then imagining that goes over the air and that can just be sniffed up by a rogue cell tower. It's kind of terrifying. And not a lot of people think of it, like, hey, never use public Wi-Fi, right? Like, never use guest Wi-Fi somewhere, without certain protections in place, without using a VPN. But then it kind of comes down to like, well, people never really think about, there's cell towers, and if perhaps those could go bad, right? So really it comes down to why build a detector. And hopefully by now you kind of understand like, okay, this is why you should build a detector, right? Because it's going to be not that expensive. And it's kind of an interesting, academic, hobby, right? So there are some apps that you can download for Android, and they have the ability to detect cell tower anomalies. And we'll kind of go into what that means in a little bit. But you need specific model phones, you need to root it, you're not going to be able to do it on an iPhone, and it kind of becomes one of those things where it's like, it's kind of more of just a pain to try and install one of these apps and configure it to work properly. And so I kind of wanted the device that I made to satisfy a couple of the conditions. So I'm a DIYer at heart. And I was a cheap college student at one point in time, and so I like trying to keep things easy to build, with a low price tag, just because that's how I operated for a really long time, and I still pretty much do. And so I wanted something that was around $50. I wanted it something that you could just set it and forget it, and then have information come to you later on. I wanted to be alerted by any anomalies, and I wanted the ability to network multiples of these together, so I could put them at different spots and kind of go from there. And so now let's talk about actually how you go about detecting a rogue cell tower. So just kind of like a wireless access point, which probably many of you are familiar with, every cell tower, or they're called BTSs or base transceiver stations, it beacons out information about itself, right? So if you think about Wi-Fi, it's like, beacons out the name of the network and the channel of the network and a couple other things. Well, cell towers, they beacon out, the MCC, so where they're actually located, their mobile network code, their cell ID, their location area code, the power that they have, the cell towers that are around them, and then they're also their channel as well. So all cell towers beacon out this information, so we can use that to identify other cell towers that shouldn't be there. And so typically all of these values that you see, they all remain constant. So the channel that it's on, the country code, the network code, the cell ID, the location area code, the neighboring cells, and the power level, those should all pretty much remain constant if you are standing in a normal area, and that's really just for the power level, right? And so if any of these values differ than what you've seen, then there's probably something interesting happening there. So it can mean that maybe the network is undergoing some maintenance, maybe a cell tower is being added, or maybe a cell tower goes down. And the idea of this is essentially what you do is you set up this device and you get a good baseline, right? You get a good baseline to know what's in your neighborhood. Kind of like if you move into a house, you see, okay, these neighbors come and go this time of the day, these cars are supposed to be there. You get a good baseline of what does your wireless neighborhood look like. And then after that, you can start to detect hey, maybe that one shouldn't be there, or that seems a little off. And so that's pretty much what it is. It's like if you're constantly vigilant at home and you're watching traffic as it goes in and out, basically just getting a good baseline so that you can see if something changes. And so here's an example of what a tower would beacon out. You'd see 310 because that's United States. You'd see if it's an AT&T tower, the cell ID, which is unique for a big enough area, the channel that it's on, and the power level. So power level generally remains constant. Now there's In an ideal world, if you are 1,000 feet from a cell tower, you're going to have the exact same power level always. That's not always the case. It fluctuates if cars go by, if there's attenuation or all these crazy atmospheric things that can go on. But generally, we'll just assume that power level is fairly constant, or at least that it averages out over a period of time. So an example of what you would see if a rogue cell tower were to come by is a new tower would have a high transmission power, right? So if somebody were to, if we think of like an access point or like wireless router, if you were to go right next to the the router, if a router would come right next to you, your power is going to go through the roof. And so kind of going off of that, there's other things that can be changed too. So a lot of these things will come default. So say somebody built an IMSI catcher, or somebody bought an IMSI catcher and they just powered it on and just said, hey, we're going to go and use it. A lot of times they won't configure the correct country code. And so if it's manufactured in China, it may have the Chinese country code on it. And so you can see like, hey, we're in the United States. The country code should be the United States. And so if you see a cell tower that doesn't have a country code of the United States, there's your sign. Same thing if you have a network code mismatch, if it's an AT&T tower and it toggles back and forth between becoming an AT&T tower and a Verizon cell tower to try and get different networks, that's a sign too. If the frequency changes a lot, so if it's hopping around, that's also something unique. And then if the location area code is a mismatch, so location area code, it's not super important, but pretty much what it is, it's like say like Ann Arbor would have its own location area code. Chicago would have its own location area code. So it's kind of like like a metropolitan area will have its own location area code. So you can kind of think of it as like the country code, but just more region specific. Okay, so why locate a tower? Because it's kind of fun, right? I mean, it's kind of cool just to be able to do this with some $50 worth of hardware. And it'd be kind of interesting to see, well, is this a new cell tower that went up on top of a building? Is it a new cell tower that they're building? Is it a new residential area that's going in? Or is it coming, emanating from a white van, right? It's just kind of cool. And so pretty much the way that you're going to locate this tower is you're going to combine all of this unique data that you've received, and you're going to basically get all of that and put it all together into a database so you can kind of search through it. And so the other cheap way, because again, I don't want to spend any more money than I have to, is instead of having multiple detectors all out there and with GPS known locations and you receive data from all of them, you can take one detector and since it's on a Raspberry Pi, you can just put it in a car and drive all around. And there was actually some researchers that did this about a year ago. They basically did the same thing that I did. They had a Raspberry Pi with a similar setup, a little bit different, and they put it in an Uber, in different ride-sharing services, and they had it automatically like go all the way throughout their city and just detect all the information about cell towers, which is really interesting, right? Like, why drive around when somebody else is going to be driving around for you? And so when you drive around with this detector, you can do some math, and with some OpenGIS software and pretty colors, you can get a lot of pretty good approximations. And I was actually really surprised when I did it. Like, wow, this came out exactly what I would expect, which I didn't expect. If any of you guys do engineering sciences and all that kind of stuff, how many times do you try and compile your code and get it to go on the first time? How many times does your formula plug and chug work on the first time? That almost never happens. So when it does, the first thought you instantly have is, I probably messed it up. So I'll show you a picture of how that worked out. I was like, wow, that is shockingly good. That's kind of cool. And so pretty much what you're going to get is readings of unique tower identifiers, power level, GPS coordinates, and you can do all of this with one detector, and you can kind of create a map on that. And so this is what I did, is I kind of drove around, and hey, there's probably a cell tower right there. And sure enough, if you look on Google Maps, there's absolutely a cell tower there. And it's really interesting because you can tease that out just by driving around and keeping something with you. Okay, so you could also do this with multiple detectors, and that's kind of the way that I've built that you can combine multiple detectors all the way up to be able to do that. And the nice thing is that you can use trilateration. We'll go over trilateration and triangulation and kind of talk about those and really what it is. And then you can also basically receive power in distance. They're not inversely proportional, right? And so there's some regression formulas that you throw in there to try and calculate it. And it's less accurate, but it's still pretty good, right? I mean, do you need to know within a centimeter where a cell tower is? No, probably not, right? And one of the other things that I've kind of looked into, but I didn't have any accurate enough clocks when I was doing this, and also I'm trying to keep costs down. is time distance of arrival. So you can kind of think of it, speed of light, is constant. And if you have a clock that can measure, the time that that the signal was released from the cell tower and the time that it takes to get to you, that's the time distance of arrival. It's how long does it take that, radio wave to hit you. I don't have an accurate enough clock to do that, so I kind of did it the poor man's way. But it's definitely interesting, and if you have, access to a software-defined radio with, a good real-time clock on it, that's definitely something to look into, but that's just not something that I did. Okay, so there's trilateration versus triangulation. Everybody really likes the term triangulate. But they're two different things. They both kind of have the same output, but the way that you get the information, you arrive at a solution is a little bit different. So I get it, but some people don't, and so we're going to go over it just because. So say there's 3 people and they're all at these different places, and a bomb goes off. What's going to happen is they're all going to just naturally look at where they heard the sound coming from, and this is triangulation. And the reason why is because there's an angle that you're looking at, and so if you put all these angles together, you can then get what was basically the approximation of where it is. And this is not how my detector works. It's an interesting way, and you could definitely make it work this way. And conceptually, it does make sense. I just haven't tried it yet. But essentially what, it would be like a little Doppler radar. So you have the sensor in the center, and you would have, basically this rotating, cone, or not cone, but like circle or spherical object that it would only, basically when, I don't know if there's a good way to point this out, but basically when it matches up to where the signal goes through, you can say, hey, this is the angle that it makes with the cell tower, and you can use multiple detectors with that method, in known GPS locations to be able to find it. That seems really difficult. I didn't really want to, try and make like a aluminum foil thing spinning around. My wife thinks I'm crazy enough as it is, and so it's one of those things. Is like, okay, I don't need some literal aluminum foil object spinning around in my living room. She would not go for that. But so you can kind of see the difference here, right? So if you look at this one, the signal can clearly go through because there's a slit in this spherical object that's rotating around. And then here it's not, so the signal would be weak because it's not being able to get through because it's being blocked out by the foil or whatever metal or insulator that you have there. So again, that's triangulation. That's kind of how it would work because you would be taking the angle of that frequency and you would then be doing some math on that. Again, not how mine works, but that's how triangulation would work. So my detector, it technically uses something called trilateration. And so everybody can really get on board with this because it's easily understandable. So say you're within 100 feet of a cell tower, you're going to have full bars. If you're 300 feet, you'll probably have less bars. And if you're 1,000 feet, you'll have even less bars. And so you can kind of think of it, the same thing, we'll go back to a wireless access point or like your home Wi-Fi router. The farther away you get, the less bars you're going to have. And so it's an easy way to conceptually think about it is, hey, the farther away I get, the less bars I'm going to have. And again, there's some math and some regression formulas that you have to do, but computers are really good at doing math, and that way you don't have to. And so basically, you can think of it as if you are 100 feet in any direction, provided there's no interference in the way, you're going to have full bars at 100 feet, right? That's pretty good. So you can assume that if you're anywhere within 100 feet of that detector, you'll have full bars. The farther away you go, if you're 1,000 feet away from it, maybe you have 1 bar. And so the idea that you kind of think about this is anywhere along that circle, you're going to have, power depending on how far away you are in a spherical, or more like a donut, but, in a circle out if you're thinking, on a horizontal plane. So if you put 2 detectors together, there's 2 spots where these circles will intersect. And your cell tower will be at either one of these 2 spots. And it makes sense because if the detector has a power level, of a certain level and the other detector has a different power level, you can kind of use some math to figure out where that is. And so if you have 3 detectors, now all of a sudden you can trilaterate it, find where all 3 circles intersect, and boom, there's a cell tower there. And this is very similar to how GPS works. GPS works in a 3-dimensional way, with satellites going in space, but they essentially emanate a signal, that has some timing in it, and there's 4 GPS, satellites necessary to be able to, figure out where you are on the planet. Well, we're kind of doing a similar, very rudimentary version of that by using power level. And so with this, you can assume, oh, okay, where all these intersect, that is going to be, the location, or at least a good approximation of where it's going to be. So you can do some fancy math. I don't know, you have Python scripts or scripts that I use that they do the math for me. I don't have to worry about it. I just pump them information of GPS coordinates and power levels and all these things, and they just figure it out, right? It's one of those things you figure it out one time, and then after that, you don't have to do anything with it. So again, you can do all the fancy math on it and do it on some graph paper. I don't. And so power, it's not linear, but the more data you get, the more information you have, and the more that you can use that essentially. And so if you want, you know, to have a more accurate representation, you're not limited to just 3 detectors. You can make as many detectors as you want, throw all that information in the script in the database, and just have it figure itself out by itself. And so that's just kind of how it is. And you can just do back of the envelope math is what we're doing when we just had 3 of them. But essentially, the more you have, the more information you get, and the better your calculations get. So how do you avoid just or basically you just want one, right? So you do multi-point trial iteration. So you basically take this device that you've made, put it in your car, and you drive around and you collect lots of data. And it gives you way more accurate results because it's like you have multiple detectors everywhere around. And luckily, cell towers don't move, and so you can get a really good idea of what's around you. And so it's really fun to just go test it on real towers and, you know, just kind of get a good idea of what's in your neighborhood. You know, new development goes in, you know, maybe they're going to put a new tower in too. It's interesting to just kind of see what's out there. And so we looked at this image before, but there's probably a tower right there in that heat map. And if I didn't put a map scale on there, but I mean, that's about 100 feet. And so it's pretty easy to determine where a tower is within 100 feet. And then if you really want to, you know, do some digging, you can then just keep that device with you and just, you know, do a hot cold game, you know, where you just walk, oh, warmer, cooler, until you're right on top of whatever it is. Okay, so let's talk about the build a little bit. So it's a Raspberry Pi 3. It can be any Raspberry Pi. This is not a power intensive, or, you know, you don't need like anything that has a GPU by any means to be able to do this. So Raspberry Pi 3, you know, an SD card. I just use stock Raspbian because it's, you know, it's an image that comes pretty much pre-baked on a Raspberry Pi. And a power adapter, just generic, hey, get a Raspberry Pi up and running, that's what it is. I got this SIM900 GSM module off Amazon. It was like, I don't know, $20 or something like that. And a serial GPS module, and a software-defined radio. I don't suggest using it, and you'll see why in a little bit. And then stuff that I had lying around the house, so scrap wood and some hot glue. So just brace yourself. This is quite literally a hack, and I mean, it's not pretty, but hey, it works. As you can see, it is a 2x4, scrap wood, and some hot glue, and some electronics on it, right? And this is, you know, way more palatable than something that goes spinning around. So I don't know, it worked for me. You can make multiple of these, and hey, if it's not broken, why fix it? Or if it's not broke, then don't fix it. I don't know, whatever, however that saying goes. So let's kind of talk about what's on here. So you see the very top, there's a GPS module. The SIM900 cell module, that's up on top as well. And basically, these hook into the Raspberry Pi, and it just acts as like a serial port. So you can just see, you know, you can pull and see what the GPS information is. You can see the, you know, the SIM900 module. And then you can see the Raspberry Pi. And you don't need the software-defined radio. That was something that when I was initially testing this, I was going to use, but then we'll talk about why I didn't end up using it. But you can see it's not a crazy, like, oh man, how could I do this? Like, you could easily assemble this in a couple hours, no problem. And that's mostly just waiting for the hot glue to warm up and cool down. So let's go over the actual cost. So if you want to make this super cheap, you get a Raspberry Pi Zero for like $10. It's not actually $10. I mean, with shipping and all that stuff, it's probably closer to $15 or $20. But still, $15 or $20 for a computer, come on, that's amazing. A USB hub if you want it. You know, you can get a $5 SD card. Really, if you shop around for any of this stuff, you can probably even get it way cheaper than the $52 total. Again, the serial module for it, for the GPS, is $16. Like, all this stuff is, you know, is pretty darn cheap for like what you're getting, right? You can detect rogue cell towers for $52. Like, that's insane. And so it's just one of those things that, you know, you can probably get it down cheaper, or you can make it a little bit more expensive and do a couple more, you know, fancy things with it. You know, you can add, you know, like a screen to it, or, you know, some other way to remotely access it. You can do other fancier things, but really, again, the base cost is this, and this is just to get you the bare minimum, right? So let's look at the SIM900 module. So the SIM900 module, this is really what does most of the heavy lifting. You can get 7 towers, so it can see 7 towers at a time, and it gives you a ton of information, way more information than at least I used, and there's no SIM card required. And so when you think about it, the idea of this is that you don't want to have to pay for you do not want to pay for a cell service, right? You're not trying to make a phone call. You're just simply listening. You are not trying to, you know, you're not trying to make phone calls or do anything like that. And a lot of things that I saw out there, they required, hey, you need to put a SIM card in, you need to activate it, you need to go through all that stuff. This does not require that, no SIM card required, and you can put it in engineering mode, and we'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. And really, most importantly, is it does not sniff traffic. That's where you can get into a lot of trouble, is sniffing cell traffic. Now again, I mean, hey, this is why I did not use the software-defined radio, but that's what's really important here, is that this is a purpose-built device, does not sniff traffic, and it is designed to basically connect to cell towers. So you get a ton of information out of it, and it's completely legal, completely something that is designed for a hobbyist. I mean, you can see it has like, board pins on it, so you can easily hook it up to a breadboard. And so one of the other things that I played around with a lot, and you can too, is you can see a lot of this information that you get from the SIM900 module on your phone. So on your iPhone, if you if you actually go to dial a number and you dial star 3001 pound 12345 pound star, if you do that, you will see all of this information, and you can put your phone into field test mode and see all the cell tower information, which is kind of crazy that it's like an Easter egg in the phone, but it's really designed so that people can do maintenance and see what's going on in the active cell network. And so if you just hit call, then boom, you can see all that information. So it's kind of interesting, kind of fun to play around with, but I don't have to do that every time that I want to look in my neighborhood and see, hey, what cell tower am I connecting to? Because oftentimes you're not even going to know if it's good or bad, right? And then Android, the field test mode, if you just Google field test mode and whatever type of phone you have, that's how you'll get it. Android's, there's a lot of different, numbers that you can dial, and they're specific from phone to phone. And there are also a lot of apps that you can get in the Google Store that, it's more, Android is more open, so it'll let you see more of that information. So let's look at a little bit of what the SIM900 module gets us. So you can see this is a serial console from the Raspberry Pi. So you push it a couple of commands, and you can see, boom, you see all 7 towers starts with 0. So you look at the end 6, you're like, Eric, it's not 6, it's 7. Anyways, if you look at all that, you can see all this information that's in a CSV format. And so, hey, I can parse CSV. That's not a problem. And so if you look at these and you kind of go through the specs, you can see what each of these things are. And so you can see the channel that it's on. You can see the cell ID, you can see the MCC, the MNC, and you can see the LAC. So you can see a lot of information. And then the RXL, that's your power level. So you can see all of these different things. And that's pretty much all the information that we're talking about. That's all the information that you want. You don't want to have to be able to sniff traffic or try and find GSM packets or all this stuff coming out of the ether. This is really all the information that you want, and it gives it to you in a nice little parsable format. Perfect. And same thing, the GPS serial module. It does GPS, no problem, right? It works exactly how you would expect. And even indoors it works. So it works exactly how you would expect. And you can see from the data, whoa, that is a small image. Essentially, it gives you, there's plenty of libraries that can go out and parse this data. And so you use that in conjunction with, the SIM900 data, and you can build out a nice little database, that includes, basically the information of, you can kind of see it there, of, you take a reading from a cell, from where your Raspberry Pi is, and you get a combination of GPS coordinates, power level, and all the cell towers that are, the 7 strongest cell towers near you with it. That's perfect. That's exactly all the information that you want. And so basically the way I did this is, Raspberry Pi 3 running stock, Raspbian. It's a Debian operating system that's made for, the Raspberry Pi and has a little bit different libraries for it. And the Pi 3 has enough power to run a software-defined radio if that's something you wanted to do. I don't recommend it, but it also has 4 USB ports, serial adapters, and it's also easily powered by one of those portable phone chargers, which is super cool because then it makes it super portable. Put it in your pocket and you're good to go. So let's talk about the TV tuner a little bit, because this is something when I was initially building this, I was like, hey, this will be really awesome to use. $20 software-defined radio, it's perfect, it's awesome. This is a great tool to use for other wireless projects. And with there's even a GitHub repo that has GRGSM to where you can listen to actual packets coming out of a cell tower. But there's a lot of tricky laws in place and there's not a lot of clear information about it. But essentially, this device can have the ability to sniff traffic. And so that's the reason that I avoided it, is because if the laws are kind of funky and you don't really know, which way they go, you don't want to start sniffing traffic and realize that you're breaking a law and then go, up on stage and talk about how you broke the law. It's being recorded everywhere, right? So don't do it. I wouldn't suggest it. this little TV tuner, $20 software-defined radio, it is awesome. It's really cool. You can use it for a ton of other projects. And technically, you could use it for this too, but why when you can use a cheaper module that does more of what you need without needing the horsepower of a Raspberry Pi 3. So pretty much, you get all that information, you collect all that information, and you dump it into a SQLite database. And so you can kind of see, it's kind of a small image. Oh, you can't even see it up on stage, huh? Anyways, so it gives you the time, the channel, the power level, all the different, basically all the things that we've talked about, throws it into a nice database. So that you can query that database or write a script that queries that database, and you can check it every 10 minutes, every 1 minute, whatever interval you want, and you can use all of that information to detect, hey, what's around me, what would I expect is new. You can have it, set flags and do all these, excuse me, all these other really interesting things, and you're just collecting it all in a simple table. And then, so there's one thing, I like to nerd out and look at SQL tables. I don't know about you guys. But if you want to make it pretty and show to somebody else that maybe doesn't like looking at SQL tables, there's this great software called QGIS. So it's free open source, GIS software, right? And using the IDW tool and open layers and a bunch of other things, you can automate making pretty pictures of where cell towers are, where they're located, and it makes it very easy to visualize. So that way you don't need to just write crazy SQL queries to try and get this information out, right? So you can write a quick script, and basically, it has a Python console, and I wrote this all in Python. So hey, cool. QGIS has a Python console. I can generate images, and hey, that looks pretty neat. And that's exactly what you would expect, or something similar to it. And so you can mess with this and play around with it. But that's essentially, what your end goal is now you have a way to visualize where cell towers are in your neighborhood, and you can use all that information for whatever you want. And it's a fun project just because you asked the question like, well, and really how this started was, well, how would I? And I was like, well, I bet you I can. Well, let me Google a little bit. Hey, this is pretty cool. And then boom, you have a working product, right? And so it's one of those things that it's important to ask the question and just wonder, hey, can you do it? Should you do it? And what are the effects of actually having a detector? So the ways that you can basically use this in a practical way, so you can have it, sitting and logging at home. And for this, you really only need one initially. And you basically have one of these $50 devices, and you can have it, run these quick little queries, to say, hey, maybe a new cell tower popped up. Maybe, maybe there is some other information like, transmission power, like any one of the things, any one of those constants that should remain constant, if any of those change, boom, you can just get an email alert. If you want to get a text message, you could use Twilio or any other really push notification software. But really what you're looking for and what this device does is it's looking for a disturbance in the force. You cannot see radio waves, and this little device sits there, and every couple of minutes it will look and say, hey, what's in my cell neighborhood? What's in my wireless neighborhood? What's there? What's there? What's there? And then it can just query and look up, oh, this is new, this should not be here, and then you get an alert from it. And so it's one of those things where it's really, it's a bunch of different pieces all put together, and it works out pretty well, at least in my opinion. And so really what it comes down to is your detector goes off. Now what do you do? And really, first thing, I'd probably turn off my phone because you never know. And then you start looking at your data, and then you go on a road trip and see if you can go find it. I mean, that's what I would do. I don't know about you, but it seems kind of fun, right? It's one of those things that when all the bells and whistles start going off, that's really when you're going to want to use it. So anyways, that's it. Question time.
All right, we're going to open up for questions for Eric. If you have a question, please come down one of the main aisles there in the middle and line up at the microphones. And we'll just go back and forth for about 5 or 10 minutes.
And if you want to catch me afterwards or shoot me an email or anything like that, that information will be there too. So I know a lot of people don't want to talk, like get up and ask a question, but if you see me around, feel free to ask me a question.
Hello. Question for you. Instead of having the femtocells catching metadata and all of that, have you thought about the mobile data offloading and what might be done in that way in a similar sort of project that you've got?
Sorry, I don't really understand. Can you rephrase the question again, maybe?
Oh, sure. Mobile data offloading. So instead of going through a cell tower, you're actually going through, say, public access Wi-Fi for your cell traffic. I was wondering if you thought about that space at all.
No, I haven't. I mean, I don't think it would be a problem to do it. You could definitely do it that way. Are you talking about offloading like if you have a detector somewhere and have it offload that data that, like your SQL data, like have that offload?
No, the actual cell traffic from your phone.
Oh, I see. Got it. Yeah, you could definitely, there's no reason that wouldn't work. You could definitely do that too. And the other thing is that, at least for what I have, is, if you suspect you're in an area of like, oh, hey, like maybe there is something here, you can just, if you have a VPN endpoint on your phone, right, you can use that and then tunnel your information out.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. So can the, Rogue Cell Tower detect your detector? Does it know that there's something out there listening?
No, it doesn't, because my detector, it only listens, right? There's no way, so it only listens, it does not transmit a thing. So there is no way to know if somebody's listening, right? So yeah, no, it can't detect my detector, which that would be, gosh, what a game of cat and mouse that would be. The detector to detect the detector to detect the detector to, you just keep going down the rabbit hole.
Especially if you're both on a road trip. At some point, you would face each other, right?
Just spy versus spy.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I have a relatively odd device, a dual SIM phone. Has anyone looked into having, using the second SIM to kind of monitor, having that functionality to figure out whether or not you have a rogue cell tower?
You mean, so you have two SIM cards
Yep.
that are both running on your device. I mean, so you can. So the difference there, are they both for different, or are they for different networks?
Different networks.
Different networks. So what would be interesting to see from that is if like your Verizon, say you have Verizon AT&T, right?
Yep.
If you have a Verizon card and a AT&T SIM card in there, and they both connect to the same tower, that would be really interesting, because then it's like, wait a second,
Exactly.
they should not be. So you could probably do something with that. However, yeah, I mean, so if you were to build like the little Raspberry Pi thing, right, you can see if it changes the, what was it called, the MNC, right, the network code. And so you can see if the same cell tower just flip-flops between different network codes.
I was just
But yeah, no, you probably could, and there might even be apps in there to detect
Yeah,
it.
just do it on my phone.
Yeah,
Like-
that would be interesting. I'd like to kind of see how that would work out.
Hey there. So small cells that network operators are deploying these days sometimes have lack weirdnesses and different cell ID conventions. Are you finding that there are false positive possibilities here?
Yeah, so that's kind of the idea behind getting a baseline, right? You throw out a baseline, and if you know, if you basically see hey, say there's Ting operates off T-Mobile, and so they do all these weird, they have different signals that go kind of funky. If you know that one cell tower gets kind of weird always, you can go find it, say, hey, this is an actual cell tower. You can go find who owns it, blah, 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 blah. And then basically just kind of whitelist that, or blacklist it from your query, so you're not every 2 minutes getting a, hey, there's a new tower. Hey, that tower's gone. Hey, there's a new tower. Hey, that tower's gone. And so that's the idea of getting the baseline, is what's there generally. You know what's kind of wonky and what's not wonky, and you know things to avoid and not look at because you've already checked them off, right? And so I have definitely seen some weird stuff out there. Like with the smaller networks that kind of deploy things in a little bit different way, but generally the idea is just get a baseline, and if you know something's weird, go check it out, and then ignore it after that. After you know that, hey, this is already kind of strange. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much what it's not a good solution. It's just kind of you just manually brute force it.
And as a follow-up, that module that you presented, I think it's quad-band GSM only, correct?
Correct, and so one of the things that you can do is if you look at Adafruit or go to Amazon or something like that, they sell, I mean there's a bunch, right? There's the 3G version, the LTE version, you can get all these different versions. And so again, I was trying to keep it cheap, and so generally, at least older Stingrays, which is probably what they have, because governments and hackers, they generally try and do things with the easiest tech or the lowest common denominator of tech. And really, there's a proof of concept. If you want to scale it up and make your own crazy detector, by all means, you can get all the sensors, all the serial things in the world, plug them all in, and just take in a ton of data that way. I just really like that one because it was really easy to work with. And generally, if somebody's going to deploy like a Stingray kind of thing, or try and hack something together, they're going to go down to GSM. And that's how a lot of the common attacks. Now there are like LTE Stingrays and that kind of stuff that do exist now. However, that GSM one is still being used in a lot of places. And so that's why I use that.
Thanks.
Hey, did you have somebody create a Stingray and test your device, or did you find any rogue cell towers in real life?
So, let me try to think of a good way to say this. At certain conferences, there are certain people that have certain devices that do this. I did not do it.
Nobody here has one.
No, but yeah, I didn't do it. However, there are certain people at certain conferences with certain devices that do it. And one of the things, and you can Google this, and it's really kind of like an amusing thing to look at, is before DEF CON, Black Hat, B-Sides, and all that stuff that takes place in Las Vegas, somebody will go out with a similar detector to mine, right, or something similar that they've made, or maybe even something after like my design, right, and they will say, here are all the cell networks in Las Vegas near the Caesar's Palace where it was this last year. Here's what it was a month before DEF CON. Here's what it is at DEF CON, and the number has doubled. Right? And so it is a very clear indication that somebody has thrown up a country code or, thrown up, one of these devices that, and people will even do it to be dumb and funny. I personally would never set up a rogue cell tower that's like beaconing like a North Korean or like a Chinese frequently, network code. Like, I don't know. However, the way that I look at it is, then it could detect it. It could detect weird anomalies going on at DEF CON, but it's DEF CON, right? Everything's terrible there. And then, but the way that I, basically made sure that it worked is I would basically pinpoint actual cell towers that I knew were in my town, and I would just say, hey, can I blindly go find them, right? Or just go drive a whole bunch, drive around a whole lot, isolate the data, make one of those little pretty graphs or whatever, and say, go on Google Earth and say, hey, is there a cell tower there? So you kind of blindly do it. And that's the way that I would blindly, test to make sure, hey, does this actually find the cell tower? And then as far as finding a rogue one, yeah, that if you were going to try and build one of these and do it and really want to know if it works, just go to DEF CON, and you'll see a ton of people that just spin these up for whatever reason. I don't know.
Hey there. I thought cell towers were leased to multiple carriers. Is that not the case? Are they dedicated to?
Gosh, and this is one of these things that it's a it depends question. So there are definitely towers, or towers, and what they'll do is somebody will own the tower, and then somebody will and then different companies will rent different space for those radios on there. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because your detector will say, hey, here's the point source of where this is coming from, where this information is coming from. And so if it happens to be that, hey, your Verizon, basically the idea of it is it would be like having two different access points in the same area. The two wireless networks coming from the same area. They're going to have all the different information. They're both going to beacon different information for, because they're each their own individual carrier. And so if you have a phone, it'll connect to one or the other one. But in terms of locating it, it'll just be, hey, there's a Verizon tower here on top of a AT&T tower on top of a T-Mobile tower, all sharing the same space. So that all gets kind of weird, but you're right. I mean, well, then you get even more funkiness too, and this is something that I've seen a lot. Is so you have so one of the things that I use for a lot of my IoT hobby thingamabobs is called Ting, and it's like a cheap SIM card, whatever, and they piggyback off of T-Mobile. And so they even have more weirdness because they basically use T-Mobile, stuff, but they have, their own subscription through that. So that's even kind of wonkier, but that's in an overarching what we care about. We care about if there is something brand new that shows up that we did not expect, right? And if you go and it happens to be a tower that has a whole bunch of co-located signals or radios there, that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for it coming, emanating from somebody's hotel room. You're looking to you're looking for it emanating from somebody's house, or from, from a location that you would not think that it would, come from, essentially.
A follow-up question, technology-wise, do you see cell towers being around in another 5 years, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe not cell towers. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have you're going to have like, oh gosh, I hate to say it, but like 5G, right? Like you're going to have faster speeds, but like smaller transmission power. So you'll have one, so right now, like if you look at a city, you'll have one big tower, right? And that one big tower will cover a lot of area and a bunch of people in it. I think what you're going to start seeing is you're going to see much smaller broadcasting like devices that essentially like, you'll put them on a rooftop of every skyscraper, every building or whatever, and they'll all just kind of mesh together and talk together. That's kind of what I see. If I was looking at some of the specs for like the stuff that's coming out, and it's hard to say if it's going to be like, truly like gigabit or anything like that, but I don't see them going away anytime soon, mostly because the infrastructure is now there, so why not use that? Why not use it?
Thank you.
Anybody else have another question? I'm going to ask a marketing communication guy question who's not a programmer IT. What do you do if you find one that's rogue? Do you have a responsibility or a need to let anyone know? Or do you just, like you said, shut off your phone?
In terms of, so that is the other hard part, is that there's no way to distinguish if it's maybe a law enforcement agency that's trying to do a sting operation, or if it's somebody that has, is just trying to be a jerk, right? And so really what it comes down to is there's no one really to report it to. You would report it to an agency, or I don't see any responsibility that you have as an individual to report something that you found. And mostly because you don't want to be the one that cried wolf and, like, hey, I found this weird signal, I found this weird thing, go look into it. Mostly because if you called pretty much 99%, even if you called AT&T or Verizon and you're like, hey, I'm picking up weird cell tower, blah, 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 you're not going to get through that call list. You're not going to go to the Verizon store and be like, oh, there's a rogue cell tower. They're just going to look at you and be like, here's a tinfoil hat, put it on, So anyways, I personally don't think that there's a responsibility to report it, mostly because A, I don't know who you would report it to. B, who knows if it's for an ongoing, law enforcement investigation. And I wouldn't want to A, blow the cover on something like that. And I also wouldn't want to paint a target on my back if they know that I have a detector running. I don't want somebody just to park a van outside my house just to be like, can you see this? So that's my thoughts on it. Maybe different than most. I don't know who you'd report it to. So really what it comes down to.
All right. Well, thank you very much for
awesome. Thank you.
Very informative and interesting conversation. That's mine.